When Toni Braxton stepped into the spotlight, her voice captivated the world, but behind that sultry alto was a woman crumbling under the weight of everyone else's dreams. She wasn't just building her own career. She was the backbone of an entire family, bleeding financially and emotionally to keep them all afloat. Fame brought her riches, but it also came with a silent price: the crushing burden of being the chosen one. What the public didn't see was a woman constantly pulled in every direction until she broke. And the most devastating part? She never asked for any of it. There's a certain kind of woman the world loves to watch rise: elegant, poised, and heartbreakingly beautiful. Toni Braxton was all of that and more. With a voice so rich it felt like velvet wrapping itself around your soul, she didn't just sing songs. She embodied pain, love, and longing. When she whispered, "Unbreak my heart," it was as if time stood still. The industry didn't just embrace her, it crowned her. She was the sound of the 90s. The Mood, a platinum-selling powerhouse who never had to shout to command attention. Her presence was effortless. Her voice? Eternal. But what we chose to see was the spotlight. The gowns, the Grammys, the perfectly curated poise. We didn't see the shadows trailing behind her. We didn't see the family pulling at her from all directions. The weight of being the one who made it. The constant, unspoken pressure to fix things. Pay bills. Carry dreams that weren't hers to begin with. While the world was busy calling her a diva, Toni Braxton was quietly being drained, financially, emotionally, spiritually. This is not the story of a fallen star. It's the story of a woman who never truly had the chance to shine for herself. Because while the public worshipped the image behind the scenes, Toni was trapped in a life where her success wasn't hers alone, it was everybody's. And that burden? That endless expectation to save the day, it nearly destroyed her. So before we get into the betrayals, the bankruptcies, the sibling tension, and the public breakdowns, let's start by telling the truth. Toni Braxton didn't just sacrifice for her art. She sacrificed for everyone around her. And no one ever stopped to ask if she was okay. Toni Braxton didn't come from glamour. She came from grit. Born in Severn, Maryland, the firstborn of 6 siblings, Toni Michelle Braxton grew up in a deeply religious, modest household where music wasn't just entertainment. It was part of the calling. Her father was a minister. Her mother, Evelyn, was an aspiring opera singer who poured every ounce of her passion into her children. Church was where it began. Sundays weren't just for sermons. They were the stage. The Braxton girls would sing gospel in harmony, standing shoulder to shoulder in matching dresses, already rehearsing for a spotlight none of them could imagine. But Toni was different. Even as a child, her voice had a smoky depth that stopped people in their tracks. She didn't have to reach for notes. She sank into them, made them her own, and it wasn't long before she began to outshine everyone around her, including her own sisters. The talent was undeniable, but talent alone doesn't open doors. Opportunity came disguised as a whisper, first through local talent shows, then through background vocals. It was small, but it was movement. In 1989, Toni and her 4 sisters were discovered by a record executive while performing together as the Braxtons. They signed to Arista Records, but their first single flopped, largely due to poor marketing. The industry didn't know what to do with 5 young black women with gospel roots and R&B ambition. The group faded into the background, but one voice didn't. Toni's. That voice caught the attention of music legends L.A. Reid and Babyface, who were in the middle of launching LaFace Records. They didn't want the Braxtons. They wanted Toni. And just like that, the separation began. A solo contract was offered, and Toni became the breakout, the chosen one, the star. Her sisters, once standing beside her in harmony, were now watching her ascend from the sidelines. By 1993, the world got its first real taste of Toni Braxton, the solo artist. Her self-titled debut album was a triumph. Tracks like Breathe Again, Another Sad Love Song, and You Mean the World to Me made her an instant icon. She wasn't a pop princess. She was a torch singer in an era of dance beats and hip-hop. Her voice was pure heartbreak, soulful, raw, and haunting. The Grammys came calling. So we did the magazine covers, the late-night shows, and the luxury brands. She became the woman everyone wanted to hear during their worst heartbreak, and that made her powerful. Then came Unbreak My Heart. Released in 1996, the ballad was a juggernaut. Written by Diane Warren and powered by Toni's devastating vocals, the song didn't just climb the charts, it dominated them. It became one of the best-selling singles of all time. You couldn't escape it, and you didn't want to. Toni's voice, trembling and controlled all at once, became the anthem of pain. That one track alone cemented her legacy. She wasn't just a singer. She was the moment. But behind the platinum plaques and the teary award show speeches, something was quietly brewing. Her rise was dazzling, yes, but it wasn't clean. Contracts were signed without full understanding. Royalties were mysteriously low. Money wasn't flowing the way success said it should. And back home, her family, who had watched her rise with pride and perhaps envy, was beginning to feel the distance. Because while Toni was winning the world, she was slowly losing control of her own. Behind every spotlight is a shadow. And for Toni Braxton, that shadow was cast not just by the industry, but by family. Toni wasn't just the eldest Braxton sister. She was the Braxton, the voice, the breakout, the golden child. And from a moment L.A. Reid and Babyface plucked her from the group and signed her solo, that title stuck. She was no longer Braxton. She became the Braxton, the one who made it. And while the cameras rolled and the world sang along to Unbreak My Heart, behind closed doors, the Braxton family was undergoing a quiet, slow rupture. See, Toni wasn't just navigating the pressures of fame. She was carrying her entire family's hope on her back. Evelyn Braxton, their tough-love mother and self-proclaimed matriarch, had big dreams for her daughters. Maybe even bigger dreams than they had for themselves. She raised her girls with discipline, with faith, with the belief that one of them was going to make it. And when Toni did, the expectation wasn't just that she'd succeed. The expectation was that she'd pull the others up with her. But dreams don't scale evenly, and ambition doesn't cancel out reality. The other Braxton sisters, Traci, Towanda, Trina, and Tamar, weren't content with just being Toni Braxton's sisters. They had voices. They had drive. And now they had a front row seat to fame without actually being in it. Imagine watching someone live out your dream, knowing full well that you're just as talented, just as hungry, but the door only opened for one. Tamar, the youngest and the most outspoken, was particularly vocal about her own star potential. She didn't just want a chance, she demanded it. Towanda pursued acting and singing. Trina leaned into entertainment and entrepreneurship, and Traci, who many said had the most soulful voice after Toni, struggled deeply with being excluded from the initial rise. The narrative became painfully clear. There was Toni, and then there were the rest. And yet, even as Toni carved out a life of Grammys and magazine covers, she was never really allowed to enjoy it fully. Because with every achievement came a question from the family. What about us? If she bought a new house, someone needed help with a mortgage. If she booked a new tour, someone else needed a job. If she had a moment of silence, someone filled it with need. That kind of pressure doesn't come with a publicist. There's no choreography for guilt. Toni wasn't just a big sister. She was a provider, a symbol, a lifeline. And that's a weight no gold record can balance out. Her mother, Evelyn, expected a certain level of leadership from Toni, not just as the eldest, but as the chosen one. She became the de facto second parent, often caught in the crossfire between her sister's frustrations and her own exhaustion. And the pain was twofold. Not only did she have to survive in an industry that was already exploitative, she had to survive the resentment that quietly brewed at home. Because how do you win when your wins make the people you love feel like they're losing? And Toni, for all her vocal strength and public grace, was deeply sensitive. She internalized the pressure. She worried about her sisters constantly. She felt responsible when they struggled. She felt guilty when they failed. And slowly, success began to feel like something she had to apologize for. No one tells you how lonely it is at the top, especially when your family expects you to turn it into an elevator. And that emotional toll, it didn't just affect her, it affected everything. Her finances, her health, her decisions. She began to say yes when she should have said no. She loaned money she wouldn't get back. She made business choices not based on growth, but based on guilt. Behind the elegant gowns and flawless performances was a woman stretched thin, trying to be a star and a savior at the same time. Because Toni Braxton may have been the star, but she never got to be just a sister again. Success has a price. But for Toni Braxton, that price wasn't just a dollar sign, it was a slow bleed. A quiet, devastating, unraveling mask behind designer labels, industry applause, and family smiles that didn't always reach the eyes. By the late 90s, Toni was everywhere. Platinum albums, world tours, sold-out shows, and a voice that defined a generation. She looked like wealth. She sounded like wealth. But behind the scenes, she was hemorrhaging money, and not just from her own spending. Let's be clear. Yes, Toni spent lavishly. She had the clothes, the cars, the homes. When you're a Grammy-winning R&B queen, there's pressure to look the part. But the real financial burden didn't come from red bottoms or jewels. It came from the people closest to her. Because Toni wasn't just spending for Toni. She was spending for everyone. She paid mortgages, covered bills, handled emergencies, provided jobs. It was unspoken but deeply understood. If Toni had it, they had it. That meant her sisters, her parents, extended family. Everyone had a need, and she was the supply. And it wasn't always malicious. Some family members truly needed help. But help turned into expectation, and expectation turned into entitlement. Toni became the bank, the fallback, the one who could never say no, because no wasn't just rejection, it was betrayal. And in 1998, it all came crashing down. Toni Braxton filed for bankruptcy for the first time. To the public, it was shocking. How could a woman with multi-platinum albums and sold-out tours be broke? The truth was layered and brutal. Her contract with LaFace Records was wildly unfair. Toni, like many artists of her time, didn't own her masters. She got pennies on the dollar for records that made millions. Touring costs, manager fees, stylists, choreographers, transportation, it all added up. But what didn't add up? Her income. By the time she got her cut, it was barely enough to sustain the image of stardom, let alone the reality of it. But what made it worse? The silence. The shame. Toni didn't want to admit she was struggling, especially not to the very people depending on her. And the family? It didn't stop needing. There are stories, whispers, really, about family members expecting luxury cars, exotic vacations, and first-class treatment at all times. Some close to the situation say Toni was guilt-tripped into paying for things she couldn't afford, all under the emotional blackmail of, well, you're the one who made it. She was the dream come true, and in their eyes, that meant they deserved the rewards too. One insider recalled how Toni once said it felt like she was working just to keep everyone else afloat, that every dollar she earned was already spent before she even cashed the check, that she owed her family her success, not just symbolically, but financially. And when she filed for bankruptcy, the judgment wasn't just from the public, it was from her own blood. Some didn't understand. Others didn't care. The money train had slowed down, and rather than compassion, there were complaints. Toni wasn't just broke. She was broken and being blamed for it. That's the thing no one talks about with family entitlement. It doesn't always look like shouting or screaming. Sometimes it's the quiet disappointment, the cold distance, the sudden silence when you stop paying, stop giving, stop carrying everything. For Toni, every financial decision came with emotional fallout, and it left scars no accounting could fix. And yet, she kept working, kept smiling, kept showing up. Because what choice did she have? She was still the golden child, still the eldest, still Toni Braxton. But now, she was Toni Braxton with bankruptcy court documents, lawsuits, and the weight of a family that saw her not just as a sister, but as a lifeline. Behind the elegance and the talent was a woman cornered by the very people she was trying to save. And it wouldn't be the last time her finances and her trust would collapse. Because when you're raised to believe that success means sharing everything, the hardest lesson is learning when to say no. And for Toni Braxton, that lesson came at an unbearable cost. When Braxton Family Values premiered in 2011, it promised fans an inside look at one of R&B's most talented families. But what the show delivered was something even more explosive: vulnerability, dysfunction, and deeply rooted family drama dressed up for prime time. At the center of it all, Toni Braxton, the legend, the Grammy winner, the reluctant star of a reality series that started as a love letter to sisterhood, but quickly became a battlefield. From the jump, Braxton Family Values positioned Toni as the calm, graceful nucleus holding everything together, while her sisters brought the big personalities, the tears, and the chaos. Toni often sat quietly, stoic, composed, almost distant. But that silence spoke volumes. Because behind every eye roll and clipped response, there was exhaustion. Not just from fame, but from family. The show painted a picture of five sisters trying to rebuild their bond through honest conversations, group therapy, and plenty of wine-fueled heart-to-hearts. But what the cameras couldn't fully capture was the weight Toni carried. She wasn't just a sister, she was the standard, the bar, the one everyone looked to for approval, for validation, for money, for answers. And that dynamic? It bred resentment. Tamar Braxton, outspoken, fiery, and ambitious, was the loudest voice on the show, and often the most controversial. Her dynamic with Toni was electric but tense. Tamar wanted out from Toni's shadow, and that desire often exploded into full-blown arguments, accusations of favoritism, and on-air tantrums that left fans divided. Was Tamar just being real, or was she weaponizing her pain for screen time? Toni, on the other hand, struggled with the very idea of reality TV. She's admitted multiple times that she never wanted to do the show, that it felt invasive, performative, and emotionally draining. But she did it for her sisters. She did it to help their careers. She did it, once again, to hold the family together, even if it meant sacrificing her peace. Then there was Traci, the late, beloved sister whose pain ran deep. For years, Traci lived in the background of Toni's spotlight, quietly nursing a dream that never fully took off. On the show, Traci's emotional breakdowns became a familiar scene. She felt excluded, overlooked, undervalued. And sometimes she was. Whether it was about touring opportunities or studio time, there was a recurring theme: Traci wanted to be seen. And Toni, often unintentionally, became the face of the system that left her behind. The irony of Braxton Family Values is that while it was marketed as a platform to bring the sisters closer, it often did the opposite. The therapy sessions felt more like interrogations. The family dinners were battlegrounds. Even most heartfelt moments were laced with tension. Viewers could feel it. The passive-aggressive jabs, the years of unresolved conflict bubbling just beneath the surface. And through it all, Toni remained visibly detached. She would show up, but not always emotionally. You could sense her frustration, the feeling of being trapped in a show she didn't ask for, airing wounds she hadn't agreed to expose. It wasn't just reality TV. It was emotional strip mining. In later seasons, Toni's patience thinned. Her relationship with Tamar became more strained. Her disappointment with the direction of the show became more obvious. And eventually, even Toni, the forever composed Braxton, began to crack. She said it plainly in interviews: "I didn't want to do the show. It was just too much." But why did she keep doing it? Because the show was a lifeline for her sisters, for the family brand, for fans who still adored them. Toni once again became the martyr. She endured cameras in her home, arguments on national television, and years of public scrutiny, not for her own benefit, but for the people she loved. Yet the cost, it was high. The emotional toll of managing your family's dysfunction in front of millions is something few can truly understand. Every fight with Tamar wasn't just a fight, it was a trending topic. Every tear from Traci wasn't just pain, it was a storyline. And Toni? She wasn't allowed to be just a sister. She was the brand, the mediator, the bank, the mother figure, the unbreakable one. But even unbreakable women get tired. Even icons crack. Behind the scenes, there were real breakdowns. Conversations that never made it to air. Decisions Toni had to make to protect her sanity, even when it meant distancing herself from her own blood. Braxton family values made for great television, but it came at a cost no one truly saw. Because when your trauma becomes entertainment, the lines between healing and humiliation blur quickly. And for Toni Braxton, the reality of reality TV was never just about the cameras. It was about surviving her family in the harshest light possible, the truth. By the time Toni Braxton filed for her second bankruptcy in 2010, the shine of superstardom had long since dulled. This wasn't the glamorous diva we saw in the Unbreak My Heart music video. This was a woman at war with her reality, overworked, underappreciated, and running on fumes. And this time, the cracks weren't just financial. They were physical, emotional, spiritual. The first bankruptcy in the late 90s had been humiliating enough. But the second? That was different. That wasn't just bad contracts or impulsive spending. This time, Toni was being crushed under the weight of everything. Touring costs, medical bills, family obligations. And let's not forget, she was still supporting her children, both of whom needed stability, not headlines. Toni didn't sugarcoat it. She owed somewhere between $10 to $50 million, according to the court documents. And her assets? They barely scratched the surface. The public couldn't understand it. How could a woman with that many hits be broke? Again? But what they didn't see was the illness silently draining her. In 2008, Toni Braxton revealed she had been diagnosed with lupus, an autoimmune disease that had been wreaking havoc on her body for years before doctors even identified it. It wasn't just pain, it was debilitating. She'd collapse after shows. Her joints ached. Her chest tightened. Some days, she couldn't even get out of bed. She later revealed that her heart had to be monitored constantly. One health scare nearly killed her. And lupus didn't just affect her body, it ravaged her finances. She had to cancel tours, end residencies, pull back from lucrative gigs. When your body is your instrument and that instrument breaks down, the money stops. And for Toni, who'd already survived one bankruptcy, there wasn't a cushion left to fall back on. Add to that the stress, constant, relentless stress, not just from the illness, but from trying to maintain the illusion that she was still the Toni Braxton the world expected. The diva, the icon, the strong one. But behind the scenes, she was breaking. She began saying it out loud in interviews, subtle at first, then more direct. She was tired. Tired of being strong, she said. Tired of being the one everyone leans on. She admitted that she didn't always want to sing anymore. That sometimes, she felt more like a product than a person. And that fame? It hadn't just cost her money. It had cost her peace. At one point, Toni confessed that she wished she could just disappear. That the pressure to be on all the time, to perform, to provide, to protect, was eating her alive. And yet, she kept pushing, kept performing, kept smiling. Because when your identity is built on resilience, there's no room to fall apart, even when you're bleeding internally. But the audience could tell. Even in her later interviews and red carpet appearances, there was a weariness in Toni's eyes. She looked flawless, yes, but tired in a way that makeup couldn't hide. You could tell that every appearance, every performance, every obligation came with a cost she was no longer willing to pay. Her voice, once silk smooth and unshakable, began to carry more than melody. It carried pain. Life had given her the kind of soul that made her voice legendary. But it had also taken more than most people could survive. This was no longer just about bankruptcy or diagnosis. This was about a woman reaching her limit. Toni Braxton, the woman the world called unbreakable, was breaking. Quietly, publicly, completely. And the saddest part? She wasn't asking for help. She never had, because she didn't know how. After all the headlines, the hospital visits, the canceled tours, and the bankruptcy filings, Toni Braxton was finally able to breathe. But the silence that followed wasn't peaceful. It was heavy. And for the first time, Toni had to face something far more frightening than financial ruin, herself. In her interviews and in her memoir, Unbreak My Heart, Toni began pulling back the curtain she'd held shut for decades. And what she revealed wasn't just vulnerability, it was truth. Painfully raw, beautifully human truth. She wrote about feeling exploited in the music industry. She wrote about constantly being the caretaker, the provider, the dependable one. And she confessed something many women carry silently. She felt guilty for putting herself first, even when she was dying inside. She admitted that she resented how people only saw the surface, the beauty, the talent, the awards. No one saw the loneliness. No one saw how every time she had a health scare, she wondered, will my kids be okay without me? Or how every family dispute dragged her further into emotional exhaustion. In one interview, she said, I didn't even know I was depressed. I just thought I was tired. And then came the family reflections. Over the years, the Braxtons had evolved, not always gracefully, not always kindly, but inevitably. Traci's passing in 2022 was a gut punch that forced everyone to take stock of what really mattered. Toni spoke openly about the hole that Traci left, about how unresolved tensions haunted her in ways she never expected. The show, the drama, the brand, all of it had taken a toll on their relationships. And once the cameras stopped rolling, the damage remained. In quieter moments, her sisters have also begun to speak differently about Toni. Even Tamar, once the firecracker, the wild card, has reflected on the pressures Toni endured as the eldest. There's more acknowledgement now, more awareness of what it cost Toni to be the golden child. She wasn't just famous. She was responsible for carrying the family's dreams, financial burdens, and emotional baggage, all while being sick, all while pretending everything was fine. But perhaps the most painful revelation of all, Toni's own admission that she often felt invisible, not as a performer, but as a person. She said she often felt like people only cared about her when she was singing or saving someone. That if she wasn't doing something for someone else, her worth disappeared. That's the dark side of being the strong one. Everyone leans on you, but no one asks if you're okay. Everyone assumes you'll handle it. So they stop checking in. They stop nurturing you. And slowly, piece by piece, you stop expecting anyone to. Toni has described herself as a recovering people pleaser, someone who's still learning how to say no without guilt, how to rest without shame, how to put herself first without feeling like she's abandoning everyone else. And that's been her most radical act. Not the comebacks, not the albums, not the performances, but choosing herself. This new Toni, she's not chasing validation. She's not hustling for perfection. She's redefining what it means to survive, not by being unbreakable, but by finally admitting that sometimes she did break. And that's okay, because being strong isn't about holding everything together. Sometimes being strong is just having the courage to let it all fall apart and rebuild yourself. So after all of it, after the Grammys, the bankruptcies, the hospital stays, and the broken hearts, one question still lingers in the background like a haunting melody. Was it worth it? Was the spotlight worth the solitude? Was the applause worth the exhaustion? Was the dream worth the pieces of herself she had to give up along the way? Toni Braxton's story is, without a doubt, one of incredible talent and resilience. But it's also a brutal reminder that success, especially when it's tied to family and fame, can come at a cost too steep to measure in money alone. She wasn't just building a career. She was carrying a legacy, holding up a family, and constantly navigating the impossible balance between self-preservation and sacrifice. It's a cautionary tale, not just for artists, but for anyone who's ever been told they have to choose between being loved and being honest, between being successful and being sane, between keeping the peace and keeping themselves intact. Toni's journey exposes the emotional labor we never see, the kind that doesn't get awards but leaves scars. She was the blueprint for how to be poised, graceful, and loyal in a storm of dysfunction. But she also shows us what happens when the strong one is never allowed to rest, when boundaries are blurred by bloodlines, when your dreams get hijacked by obligation. And yet, somehow, Toni Braxton is still standing, still singing, still evolving, not because she was unbreakable, but because she broke and still found a way to put herself back together. So what does her story ultimately say? It says fame doesn't protect you from pain. Family doesn't always mean safety. And strength isn't about how much you can carry. It's about knowing when to set it down. Toni Braxton is not just a diva, not just a legend. She's a survivor. And her story? It's not just music history. It's a lesson about boundaries, about worth, and about the power of finally choosing yourself.